Hello, everybody. I hope it's been a good day. As the next to last speaker, I'm well aware that reception is right around the corner, and obviously many times those are the most interesting discussions one can have. So what I just wanted to do is I thought I'd mention a couple things that with luck might stimulate some conversation as people think about moving forward, and just raise a few of the things that we see on the macro level. As you heard from Chris, partnering is at the core of USAID's mission. As he said, the first two words of our mission statement are, we partner. And you heard from Daniela that now that's the globe's goal as well. Goal number 17 is all about partnering. And because of our emphasis on partnership, we've been very intentional about how we can develop the next generation of partnerships for the 21st century. All of you have done a lot of great things over the last 10, 20 years. Earth-shaking, path-breaking partnerships. And our folks have done a lot of great work across two different administrations in this area, but I'm quite confident that we're only on version 2.0 or 3.0, with versions 4, 5, and 6 right around the corner, probably to be written by many of you folks. And one of the things is that hopefully many of these partnerships can affect change at a scale that is needed to deliver on the promise of those global goals that Daniela and others have talked about. In our case, let me give the example of Power Africa. It brings together African governments, dozens of private sector investors, other donors such as the Swedish International Development Agency, 12 US government agencies to increase electricity across sub-Saharan Africa. Because as you may know, 600 million Africans have no electricity. Since the launch, which was only a couple of years ago, 2013, Power Africa's more than 100 private sector investors have committed $31 billion, and the development partners have committed up to another $12 billion. That's the kind of global scale that I'm talking about. And as you've seen today, our emphasis on partnering has also meant that we're thinking a lot about the art and craft of partnerships themselves. Across our agency, we're wrestling with questions about how do we work more effectively with different sectors, whether technology firms or companies working in crisis or conflict areas, or people working in tech, or all the sectors in which we work. And we struggle with some of the same questions as our private sector and implementing partners do about value and challenges of shared valued partnerships versus CSR partnerships. I'm the first to say, but I think our whole team would join me in saying, we know we don't have all the answers, which is why I think it's fitting this is billed as a practitioners forum, because there's things that all the practitioners can work on and talk about across the board to improve the practice of partnerships. So I'll mention 2 or 3 things in case it fosters some discussion. First thing, and when I say these things apply as much or more to our own teams as anybody here. The first thing is we've got to stop reinventing the wheel every time we build a new partnership. One of the reasons USAID assigned some of our staff to act as relationship managers for several dozen of our biggest relationships was that so that any of our offices seeking to build a partnership with an organization could build off of the other arrangements. We're so decentralized, we didn't have what I first encountered as a young banker at Citibank in 1985, which is relationship managers. That's why we brought it into the agency, so that we're not reinventing the wheel. And I'm sure that many of you have other ideas about how we can do this to get more efficient at partnership formation. Secondly, I think we need to figure out ways of moving from multiple pilot scale projects without having strong monitoring or evaluation or scaling plans, which aren't like the one we just saw about the pastoralists, which had metrics and is putting in place RCTs and everything. But how do we move from those multiple pilot scales to creating platforms for collective action at scale? Many of us have gotten better at developing transactional partnerships with private sector partners, and that's good. These partnerships are important. But we also think that these are alone, they're not enough. We've also got to leverage government convening power to bring entire industries and sectors together. Power Africa is an example. The Tropical Forest Alliance 2020, which builds on the purchasing power of $1 trillion a year to try to have net zero deforestation on 4 value chains, is another. And Feed the Future is a third in agriculture. Doing so is critical to achieving the SDGs. And I know that for the private sector, having been in the private sector is not there to achieve the SDGs. So there will be plenty of times when the private sector is saying there's nothing about this that hits our strategic objectives, and we'll say, great, we get that. But what I think we've all seen more and more is there's this overlap. It may only be 1 in 10, but there is this overlap where something that is good for the bottom line also is good for development. I don't know if Sarah Thorne's still here, but I always repeat her example, for instance, which is, and it's so appropriate given tomorrow's International Women's Day, is educating women and girls is educating Walmart's future workforce and their future customer base. That's also a development win. There's an SDG about that. But building these partnerships at scale requires us to broker dialogues with host country governments, the private sector, and civil society. The new Alliance for Agriculture was a 3-way partnership. Governments signed up to do a whole bunch of stuff, and if they did that stuff, businesses said they'd invest almost $8 billion on agriculture, and then the donors said they would do a host of things. And that was settled in a deal that President Obama convened at Camp David of the G8 with the private sector in attendance, which they had never done before, by the way. And we've got new things to figure out besides just who's there at the table. Another thing which can sound really silly, but it's important given how the world works, is every organization needs its moment of glory and leadership in order to ensure their funding and their place in the world. So how do we share leadership, branding, and credit? That becomes very important, and yet I've seen deals flounder because everybody wants to do their own thing and have their own duplicative thing, but then we're not working at scale. Executing this kind of convening power requires those of us in government to build new skills and to develop new bureaucratic muscles. Some of that is doing, like Alexis talked about, in 100 days, but we also need our staff and leaders to not only design programs and procure contracts, but folks who can facilitate relationships and identify areas of shared value. And I'm really glad to say that Chris Jurgens and a bunch of people are really good at that, and we're trying to get them more folks to help them. In doing so, we need to learn from our experiences to date. We funded a study, an in-depth study of 20 multi-stakeholder initiatives to understand the lessons learned about these critical types of collaborations. And we should continue to look at this and share these thoughts amongst all of us. And lastly, for the NGO and implementer communities that so often do the work on the ground to align the resources and the skills of the global players and the local partners, we hope that you'll continue to invest in the skills and capabilities that will enable you to broker and manage complex partnerships and be the glue. You really are the glue holding the critical partnerships together. For all of us here, what we need for problem solving in the 21st century are partnership builders who are not afraid to take on technical and difficult challenges, and many of your presentations here illustrate that you all fall into that category. People who are given the incentives and the space to create transformative partnerships to help improve some aspect of our world, and who are ready to roll up their sleeves and do the work necessary to turn ideas into action, most importantly, at scale. And on that note, I'd now like to turn it over to our final speaker. And we owe her special thanks because Abigail Disney unfortunately became ill and is not able to join us. So on incredibly short notice, and let's be most appreciative of this, Kathleen Keenast has joined us to give the final remarks. She is the Senior Gender Advisor at the U.S. Institute of Peace. our host here, where she's worked since 2008. She's also a member of the Council of Foreign Relations, and as a sociocultural anthropologist, she's focused on the different gendered impacts of violence and conflict on both men and women. In addition, her efforts have focused on the UN Security Resolution 1325, including the critical role that women should play in all aspects of peace building. And so she has a very long and distinguished history of writing a lot of different documents and working on a lot of very interesting projects, and has been part of the vanguard of introducing the concept of getting men in conflict countries to champion women's rights. And so, especially in view of the fact that tomorrow is International Women's Day, it's my pleasure to introduce and to thank her for pitching in on short notice. Dr. Keenest.